Hey, welcome to Inside the Hero's Journey. This is episode 10, called Apotheosis. Now, this is really the apex of the hero's journey, and we're going to be talking about enlightenment and all of the aspects that go into that and all the concepts, and how all of that fits into this stage of the hero's journey. Alright, let's not waste any time. When the envelopment of consciousness has been annihilated, then he becomes free of all fear. Beyond the reach of change, all beings are without self. So what does that mean? The fears of the ordinary world have now been destroyed, and the hero isn't scared anymore. They can change as they please. Now, they're not going to be afraid because they've mastered the mental and the physical skills in order to overcome their problem. They've achieved a state of enlightenment. Enlightenment in stories is the mother and the father archetype combined. It's about going beyond a hero's physical, material experiences and getting into the psychological experience. Okay, number 1. The world is moved along by enlightenment. Number 2. Enlightened thoughts can move the world, but the world doesn't move enlightened thoughts. Number 3. Enlightenment isn't affected by pain or pleasure, but enlightenment can change what pain or pleasure is. And number 4. Anyone has the ability to be enlightened. Enlightenment as a force is always trying to make the world a better place. And as far as the hero's journey goes, it's the penultimate stage of the initiation phase of the hero's journey, because it's where the hero fully knows and understands this new idea without needing to revert to the pairs of opposites that they used before in the ordinary world in order to define who or what they are. For example, time and eternity are two sides of the same coin. And in that way, it's an androgynous symbol. Now, as earthly beings, we experience both time and eternity. Now, we experience time in birth because we haven't existed for all eternity, and now we do, so we get to experience time. Now, when we die at death, we no longer experience time anymore, but we now don't exist for all eternity. Now, the hero's journey is all about that death part of ourselves, or way of thinking, in order for it to be reborn as something new. We get a glimpse of eternity and then go back to living in time. So there's a super basic way of symbolizing enlightenment, and I'm going to use something that's very commonly known in the West, the story of Adam and Eve, which is when eternity moves into time. Now, the idea being that one is then split into two, which then comes together again to create a new generation after it. Which is when the human plane, or life, which is represented by the mother archetype, and the divine plane, or morality, which is the wrath, justice, grace, and mercy, which is represented by the father archetype, meet, and knowledge is regained. In the ordinary world, the urge to destroy the father is real, and older men in communities will protect themselves from the next generation coming up by using the symbolic positions they hold in the development of that next generation. They pretend to be the punishing father, but turn out to be the nourishing mother, at least symbolically. And through this process, the next generation grows up initiated in what the previous generation understood. But this new generation will have different outsiders that they will place all of the bad stuff in their life on. Now, exclusive groups only create partial solutions to their problems. And it's because they're exclusive. Because anything outside of their group, they leave out their sympathy or their protection. And so any consideration for that is left out of their solution. Which ends up meaning that their old way of thinking is never truly destroyed. And the problem gets bigger. And so big that it actually ends up going beyond their group. And if they aren't willing to compromise, then instead of trying to change themselves, they try and change the world to fit in with them, and not the other way around. And they will wage war on the world with good intentions, as they think it's the right thing to do. Which probably explains why the world is just a big set of different groups, all with their own versions of virtue, just arguing with each other over which ones are the best, instead of practicing those virtues with each other. Now, when we get over our prejudices, we realize we don't have to fight people if the solution that we're coming up with is universal. That how we do things is way less important than what we are trying to do. Unless how you're doing it doesn't support what it is you're trying to achieve. And when how something gets done doesn't facilitate what it is you're trying to achieve, the problem will inevitably come back. It's like if you're trying to reduce teenage pregnancy and you teach abstinence, the problem doesn't go away. It doesn't solve the problem. And if the situation between what is getting done versus how it's getting done gets messed up enough, then people will get frustrated and they will either look to solve a different problem or they'll try and find a different solution to that particular problem. Enlightenment is as much about achieving peace and serenity as it is about revealing a bad situation for what it is. It's like a snowflake and the snowflake melting. Enlightenment is both the snowflake and its melting. Now, let me explain that a little bit. So, underdeveloped consciousness, or babies, are born, and they are developed through life, and then they eventually get old and they die. And this process happens over and over and over and over again. With each new generation that comes forward, constrained by what it is they don't know. Now, when a generation wants to value their version of virtue over creating sort of peace amongst people, then that's how you create hate. Enlightenment is an instinctive response. When a hero feels they have problems or things holding them back, enlightenment is the force that's telling them to grow. Now, when they overcome and master a problem, it allows them to move forward with their lives. Understanding that human knowledge about anything is limited, when a hero meets other people who have ideas that they don't understand, they're able to recognize that they are going to be enlightened in their own way. Human desire for justice, then followed by wrath, is what causes them to punish people who don't think the same way they do. But a hero goes through the initiation and finds the grace and mercy on the other side, without which the problem can't be resolved. That by protecting one group against another, neither will be able to survive the justice and wrath that they are going to inflict upon each other. But if they choose to solve the problem together, then they both get to be reborn as with these new ideas, and not as two separate groups, but now as one group altogether. The dear, protecting mother of our body could not defend us from the great father serpent. The mortal, tangible body that she gave us was delivered into his frightening power. But death was not the end. New life, new birth, new knowledge of existence was given us. That Father was himself the womb, the mother of a second birth. The idea of change is the mother and the father combined. Combining those two is what the process of initiation is all about. A hero is taken away from the things that protect them, their sense of self is taken apart, and then they're faced by how life really works, forced to destroy any old ideas of who they were, and then they're suddenly reborn as something better than they were before. Now, if this change is only for a exclusive group, then they become fighters for that group. But if they look for change that can apply to anyone, irrespective of any divisions that they might have, then they are going to find universal solutions. They will stop wanting for themselves and stop being scared of other groups, but they become the thing that people want and the thing that people fear. They become change itself. Now, it's through enlightenment that the lessons of the meeting with the goddess, woman as temptress, and atonement with the father all come together. Now, the hero will first meet the mother, who will teach them that protection and punishment are two sides of the same coin. Then they'll meet the father, and the father will teach them how the idea used to work before they were split into pairs of opposites. And that's when the hero will rediscover the solution that was inside of them all along. Enlightenment is also the place where the difference between death and rebirth disappears. Now, that can only exist where there are desires, hostilities, and delusions. Now, it's the final trial of a hero to overcome all three of those things, to see how the world truly works without them, and to find the ultimate solution that they're looking for. And that solution would be to see who and what they really are. What are their actual desires, hostilities, and delusions? And then have those new ones replace the old ones. But if any part of their old selves remain, then there's a chance that they'll go back to being what they used to be. But also, if they have killed off every part of their old self, then they'll be reborn as something new permanently. Enlightenment is the joining of the mother and the father archetypes together, which represents the overcoming of death via a rebirth. Now, time is symbolically represented as the mother's womb, which is when the hero is separated from the father. Now, when the hero is born, that birth is therefore entering eternity, which is death, which is brought forward by the father. And that's when a hero realizes they aren't something that is part of two different entities, but they are just one entity altogether. The mother and the father can be regarded as both time and eternity, or death and rebirth. And it's the two of those things coming together that becomes productive in the real world. So here's one way to look at it. The mother is time and the father is eternal, and them coming together is productive. Change is the concept devoid of time and is therefore eternal, and time represents the real world. When you use the idea of change in the real world, it becomes useful. Or you could look at it as the father who initiates the hero into an idea, with the mother then representing the end goal, which is looking beyond time at some new idea, which would be the eternal. And so the mother and the father are two sides of the same coin. If they were separate coins, they would have the same things on each side. And seeing them as the same thing is the same as being enlightened. So the method of change, which is inducing the death of a part of ourselves, which is the eternal, and the realization and creation of new ideas, which is the rebirth of who we are as something better, is also the process of enlightenment. The two are the same. Each is both. And the dual form is only an effect of illusion, which itself, however, is not different from enlightenment.